Hello, everybody. Greetings from Ohlone territory. My name is Bia Labachi, and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm the executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. I'm also public education and cultural specialist at MAPS. And it's my honor to be here today. I'm very much an admirer of pioneers. I had the pleasure, I guess maybe 15 years ago or something like that, to meet JP and spend a few hours in Brooklyn, New York, talking about the most interesting, sophisticated ideas ever. JP is a kind of mastermind behind Bioneers and has been a nice colleague and friend and supporter, always super kind, super helpful, super present, and has been a lot of an inspiration for us to create. Chacruna has been very supportive. I feel Chacruna is very aligned with Bioneers. Maybe we can be like Bioneers when we grow up. Bioneers has been around for over 30 years. We're a very small organization, very grassroots, based in Northern California. I'm speaking from San Francisco Bay Area, Ohlone territory. Um, the Chacruna Institute is focused on providing public education around psychedelic plant medicines. And we're also trying to create a bridge between the world of ceremony, ritual, religion, indigenous people, the global south, and the emergent field of psychedelic science, of psychedelic assisted therapies. So many of us are anthropologists or social scientists, geographers, historians, sociologists, people from humanities, trying to talk also to an audience of medical doctors, psychologists, and counselors, and trying to create these bridges and these dialogues between North and South, between indigenous ceremony, ritual, and science, between English speaking and non English speaking, between social sciences and biomedicine. And we also have as a goal in Chacruna to give platform and visibility to populations that have been traditionally marginalized in the field of psychedelic science. And so the stars of our conferences and of our articles and a lot of the projects we do are people of color. We have an emphasis on indigenous people and African Americans and people of color in general. We're also trying to elevate voices of women, voices of queer people, and immigrants and students and the global south. As I said, Chacruna is trying to help rewrite the narratives that the field of psychedelic science tells itself. So it didn't start all in the 50s, or the great teachers and professors aren't all white biomedical scientists that are located in mainstream universities. But this started much before and has a much longer history. And there is this continuity between shamanism and the underground of psychedelic assisted therapies and the above ground of clinical trials. It's also, as part of this interest and this focus, we have created the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas. And I would like to welcome to stage my dear colleagues, and just want to preface by saying that Dr. Daniela Peluso is part of our board of directors, and she's an anthropologist, but she's also versed in finances, in nonprofits, and in a whole set of subjects. She has been a solid soundboard for me for I don't know how long, maybe 15 years as well. Is very much an inspiration and a colleague and friend and mentor and a person that I look up to. And together with her, Joe Mays, who was her student and is also part of Chacruna now, that I proudly managed to steal to our team, and works now full time in Chacruna, and is another very kind soul, full of knowledge, that has been doing some really important work. And with this, I finish my short introduction about what Chacruna is, and I would like to pass the word on to Joe to talk a little bit about our Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas. Thank you, everybody. And again, so good to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Bia. It's my honor to be here with you and Daniela, who has been an advisor to me and an inspiration to me since I was her student studying under her at the University of Kent, Canterbury. And like Bia said, my name is Joseph Mays, and I'm the program director of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas. And I started this work. It came out of my graduate field work, but I've been working in ecological and ethnographic fields for about 10 years. And over the years, working on both biological conservation and cultural conservation, I've come to see that both of these are really the same project, because to conserve nature, you also have to conserve human communities. And this is demonstrated to us by the fact that indigenous territories and indigenous lands have higher biodiversity and higher carbon storage and less deforestation than protected areas, state managed, NGO managed national parks and preserves. And there's also a direct correlation between cultural, ethno-linguistic diversity and biological diversity. So we can't separate these two pursuits. And the most impactful way to support biodiversity is to also support indigenous autonomy, indigenous sovereignty. So that led me to the development of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, which is a pathway and a resource for supporting indigenous communities. And it is meant to be accessible and aimed at individuals as well as business owners and investors in the psychedelic space to invest and contribute to a pool of funds, which is distributed evenly to 20 different indigenous communities. These are all indigenous organizations that are community led and community run, and they're doing everything from protecting water resources to building plant nurseries to reforest with native food species and medicines, as well as other plants that are voted on by community assembly. This money goes towards supporting community mapping efforts, fighting for land rights, as well as replenishing native sources of medicinal and traditional plants, and just all types of different kinds of cultural conservation. So I'm really, really grateful to be part of this work. And I believe that we're going to share a couple videos that we've received from our partners in the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative program. One video will be coming from Ecuador, from an organization called Yakum and the work that they do with the Secopai Nation. And then we're also going to get a short statement from Nina Wahuinikui from Acre, Brazil. And just to sort of shed a little bit of light on what kinds of things IRRI goes into, and just to also open up our conversation on what reciprocity should look like and how these partnerships should be built with indigenous communities in order to prioritize their autonomy, in order to empower them, as well as sort of create a new model of support which doesn't impose outside agendas on indigenous peoples. And one of the ways that we do that is by making these funds unconditional and not having strings attached, so that they can be used to meet the urgent needs of the communities, and doesn't require regular reports from participants, apart from the ones that they choose to give, because these are built on long-term relationships of trust, and the interactions happen organically and without coercive pressure. So I think I'm gonna cut short my summary, and we'll get deeper into the details further on. Do we want to bring Daniela on just to briefly introduce before we show the videos?
Yeah, sure thing.
Sure. Okay. Well, here I am. My name is Daniela Peluso, and I'm an anthropologist. And reciprocity has always been an important part of not just my work, but I think it's really what makes a relationship a significant one in anyone's lives. So if psychedelic plants are significant in your life, then the sort of principles of reciprocity that surround that should also be important. I actually became involved with an indigenous health movement in Amazonia in the early 80s, and I've been working in Amazonia since then. And my reason for becoming an anthropologist at the time was a form of reciprocity, because I wanted to give myself more legitimacy so that I could be more supportive to the efforts that were happening on the ground, which at that time, involved and still do land right cases and, fighting for bilingualism and all kinds of things that have become a little more recognized now. And this is actually even before the creation of a lot of national parks. So as an anthropologist, I've always prioritized working on topics that people themselves thought were important, the kinds of things that mattered to them. I wasn't always able to do that as sort of part of an academic pursuit. I kind of somehow had to work twice as hard by doing that and then also fulfilling like the more sort of theoretical aspects of being an anthropologist. But I've always been committed to publishing in Spanish and also publishing in Eseja, and also co-authoring with indigenous peoples, going back since sort of the start of my career. But I guess, hello, and I just wanted to say that reciprocity is really part of anything that is meaningful in life.
Thank you, Daniela. If I can ask the Bioneers wonderful tech team to pull up the videos that we modestly did in this turbulent times of pandemic. Also, thanking our indigenous partners for their effort to try to send this from down where they are.
Buenos días con todos. Mi nombre es Arley Payaguaje. Soy de la nacionalidad Secoya. Mi capacidad es como un técnico dentro de la comunidad, en la cual he aprendido muchos conocimientos de las plantas, de saberes, de tradiciones, de las culturas. Y llegando a esa realidad y estudiando sobre los puntos más importantes de mi cultura, he descubierto que mi cultura está perdiendo los conocimientos tanto en medicina, en plantas, en diversos conocimientos que está perdiendo, como conocimientos de tema de ayahuasca, que es más importante. Tomar yagé, beber yagé, el ser como líder de yagé. Entonces esos son unos de los puntos más que está perdiendo dentro de la comunidad. Y llegando a otro punto que es económico, es un punto más amplio dentro de la comunidad. Principalmente la nacionalidad está conservando casi como 24,000 hectáreas de bosque primario, y los bosques secundarios son casi alrededor de 120 hectáreas, que son chacras. La comunidad está viendo una situación de prioridad en temas de economía que inspira a destruir el bosque de ciertas cantidades, pero como jóvenes y grupos de mujeres que tengo ven de diferente forma y de diferentes maneras de aprovechar el bosque. Y llegando a esas conclusiones, hemos destacado que dentro de la comunidad hay diversos productos que producen cada año. Entonces, como mujeres y jóvenes que están dentro del trabajo, han comenzado a experimentar muchas cosas de muchos productos, y ya estamos avanzando con las técnicas de mejoramiento de ciertos productos, como este de morete, que es un producto de la Amazonía, y propia de aquí, de toda la Amazonía. Entonces es un producto que las mujeres están procesando, buscando la forma y la alternativa de ingresos económicos a la comunidad. Y también tenemos un vivero que estamos casi llegando a 5.000 plantas de diferentes especies que queremos reforestar dentro de la comunidad. Y también dentro del vivero faltan ciertas herramientas y mejoramiento de infraestructura del vivero. Hay otro que mencionaría que necesitamos como mejoramiento de capacitaciones, de liderazgo, emprendimiento, de bioemprendimiento. Entonces son esos temas más importantes dentro de la comunidad. Y específicamente nosotros como grupos de jóvenes y mujeres que llegamos a esta conclusión porque dentro de la comunidad quieren expandir los monocultivos de palma y entre otros productos que asemejan la diferencia entre destruir el bosque y mantener el bosque. Entonces, eso es la única diferencia que hay que tomar muy en cuenta y queremos demostrar ante esas acciones que hay diferentes maneras de obtener ingresos económicos hacia la familia. Y eso es una oportunidad que veo desde mi punto de vista como líder del equipo. Hablando del tema de reciprocidad, hay mucho valor, mucha amistad y mucha buena relación dentro de la comunidad. Entonces el grupo necesita ciertas acciones en las cuales quiere avanzar y mover mucho a la gente de un lugar a otro, pero no contamos con suficientes recursos para esos movimientos y temas de reforestación y de recuperar las plantas medicinales, frutales y de artesanía. Entonces son unos productos más importantes que dentro de la comunidad ha comenzado a tomar acciones serias para buscar y descubrir y solucionar los problemas. Entonces eso es desde nuestro punto de vista más importante que y también quiero agradecer por la atención que tienen ustedes por este mensaje que doy. Muchas gracias.
Meu nome é Ninauá, sou liderança Runicuim, sou do estado do Acre, da região amazônica do Brasil. Sou presidente na Federação do Povo Runicuim do estado do Acre. Quero aqui agradecer o Instituto Chacruna e ao mesmo tempo parabenizar pela iniciativa da criação do URI, né, esse programa que é tão importante e que é tão necessário que seja estruturado e fortalecido. O URI, como esse programa que tem apoiado diretamente as comunidades que estão com menos acesso nas grandes discussões, que estão hoje necessitando, né, do apoio para poder executar projetos internos dentro da comunidade, inclusive trabalhando a questão do fortalecimento tradicional, a preservação da questão ambiental e todo um trabalho interno que são feitos de segurança alimentar dentro da comunidade. Esse programa ele é tão importante porque ele passa pelos serviços terceirizados. Então é um trabalho feito diretamente com a comunidade, na qual nós temos recebido esse apoio do programa URI, né, e que cada pessoa que tem doado, cada pessoa que tem apoiado esse projeto está contribuindo com uma comunidade da maneira direta, sem que passe por terceiro, sem que seja terceirizado esse contato. Então, para nós, ele é fundamental que seja fortalecido e que as pessoas possam continuar apoiando. e estamos à disposição para poder estar contribuindo com esse trabalho tão importante e recebendo esse apoio direto na conta da nossa associação, na conta das nossas comunidades, e que a gente vai estar na execução desses recursos, apresentando o relatório de execução, né, de todo o apoio que nós possamos receber para os trabalhos internos da comunidade. E são várias áreas que são trabalhadas, desde a área de educação, recuperação de áreas que estão degradadas, né, na questão do saneamento básico, na realização de encontro entre a população da comunidade para poder estar discutindo melhores estratégias. Rauch, muito obrigado por tudo.
Rauch, Ninawa, missing Brazil so much, 2 years away, stuck in the United States in the global pandemic. Nice to be in this global virtual community with all of you, and so happy to see our friends full of still optimism and hope despite all the challenges. It's such an honor to be part of this team and have kindness and friendship from Indigenous people that are still healing. Non-Indigenous people are still receiving thousands of desperate Westerners that want healing and being open and generous in so many regards. So we're going to have a conversation. Of course, we would have loved to have some of these Indigenous partners online with us today. So I just want to acknowledge that. It's a loss, but it was a challenge for us in terms of setup. So thanks for the videos, and I hope you all understand the limitations of doing this virtually. And I'm going to take the opportunity to make this a conversation, and in the end, get some questions and answers from the public. So if that all sounds good to you, I'm going to move to asking Daniela if you can talk about the historical relationship and current inherent power imbalances between nonprofits and NGOs and Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Pia. Yeah, that sounds like several questions in one. So I think I'll start by saying something about the historic flows of power and the history of extraction that has systematically moved from south to the north. And I guess I'll venture to say that it's the use of psychedelic plants, of course, is part of a historical trend that is also part of a capitalist endeavor, despite spiritual intentions, that those are not outside of capitalism. I would argue they've never been. But that, we often think of this capitalist endeavor as being epitomized by the pharmaceutical companies that are becoming quite predominant in psychedelics. But this trend began with small-scale entrepreneurism that also was leveraging indigenous knowledge for Western use. And we know that is now, has an international appeal or market, as I might also venture to say. So any such move away from the local, and especially toward extractivism that benefits outsiders, will have mixed, if not negative impact on indigenous and local peoples. And of course, it's their expertise and practices that have long been the hallmark of psychedelic plant use. And any such direction in flow is going to bring up questions of post-colonialism and, of course, the long legacy of imperialism. So my experience is mostly in the Amazon basin, though I do have some experience with Northern American indigenous communities. But I'm going to speak primarily to that history because it really does apply across the Americas in different ways. So I also want to note that when I speak of the northern drain of resources, I include North American indigenous peoples as part of the Global South. So just to kind of give a brief historical summary, in Amazonia, entrepreneurial businesses were operating very efficiently since the 17th century. And they started out with animal skins and timber, vanilla, cacao, and quinine later, of course, which was then used to cure malaria, and rubber, which of course is quite infamous, and other commodities that propelled these business pursuits, and that brought great harm to the regions, mostly through coerced labor and the literal hunting down of people and disruption and relocations of societies. And while one hand was doing that, the Christianity was actually offered with the other hand. That brought its own challenges. A general pattern of exporting natural resources outside of the region was entrenched by the 19th century and has really shaped the economic and political reality of Latin American countries today. And many of these businesses benefited from the image of the indigenous person as either primitive or wild or noble. And these are still images that exist today in the Western imagination. Sometimes they're spoken of in ways that are meant to be respectful. But interestingly, it was actually traders who perpetuated a lot of myths about indigenous people as a way of sort of controlling the area and using a kind of mysticism as something dangerous. And it was designed really to keep competition away. So I don't want to give, I guess I'd like to say that 70% of indigenous Amazonians now live in urban areas. And what this means, and it's not a permanent residence, it means that there's a flow between the rural and the urban, which means that there's also increasing economic interests. And that now, sort of the more current fast forward version of that is really through the environmental economy, through ecotourism, conservation, and other tourist-related activities. And a lot of these are actually built around and spoken of in terms of a project economy, and a lot of them are actually done through NGOs and nonprofits, as well as for-profit. Some of these are like designed to be sort of hybrid type institutions. So I guess my brief summary really is to just make the point that the psychedelic renaissance is very much rooted in this kind of history and process through its own adventure travel and its exportation of psychedelic plants. It's kind of broadcasting, of this, of rituals, movement of practitioners, and related tourism, and of course it has reached the international proportions of today and is indeed a global trend. So how does one try to offset this? Well, there's multiple ways. There's quite a lot of ways, but one of them, and the most convenient way, is really through donation, which is why we're kind of here today, is to talk about a fund that tries to approach things differently, a fund that, well, it's not a fund, it's actually a program that tries to give an opportunity that's quite unique. So regarding, I guess the other part of your question, Bia, was about NGOs and nonprofits. And there are many that do absolutely incredible work that reflects genuine reciprocity, especially the human rights groups and the land rights groups and so forth. But I'm sort of singling out in the way you've asked the question really is, the psychedelic nonprofits or for-profits. Where is reciprocity, in these nonprofits and profits? And if it does exist, how is it modeled? And the way that I see this project economy is that it's very much focused on pet projects that are associated with the actual work of these groups. And these groups are already profiting on a lot of them from a tourism model, for instance. and they're already catering to a community of people that are benefiting from that model. And the thing, I was speaking earlier about the negative impacts of extractivism is what happens to the secondary economies and to the surrounding areas and to the kinds of work that local people are doing that are not visible. And those are the kinds of organizations that we're trying to bring attention to. So what often happens with NGOs is they create projects which make them look good and make their own work look good, and supporting what's already happening rather than to address sort of the broader context in which that is going on. So what Chacruna wants to do is to move toward supporting the hard work that movements are already doing, addressing the broader context, addressing the broader economy, which is actually interrelated to what makes the regions where psychedelic plants are popular. It makes those regions vibrant, and it's also a critical aspect. These other kinds of efforts are not disconnected or unrelated. They actually keep what we might refer to as the cosmological alive in ways that cosmo-capitalism completely ignores.
Thank I want to invite everybody. Daniela has talked about this global local entrepreneurism system, and she did publish a very good article about this in a book that I co-edited with Clancy Kavanagh, and we have a summary of that article in the Chacruna website. We have also published different papers about concepts of extractivism and reciprocity and decolonization and collaboration. I want to invite folks to also visit our website and read about some of this things that she spoke about. And the way I see Chacruna, we're trying to support indigenous people, but we're also a school. We're a school that we're in a collective project to learn together, or to learn to unlearn, or to learn how to learn, to try to think differently and try to have critical thinking and produce knowledge. And knowledge matters, and culture matters, and plants matter, and indigenous people matter, and territory matter. So we're not just trying to give money to people, because also we don't have so much. It's hard to fundraise, but we're trying to produce these conversations. And this is a collective endeavor. And we have a membership system that we're inviting everybody to join and be a part of our school. We're all teachers co-creating the future and this dream, this reality. And I would like to ask Joe, if you could talk a little bit about the concept of reciprocity.
Sure. I think Daniela touched on it a little bit when she mentioned the sort of some of the colonial stereotypes associated with indigenous people that I think are especially prevalent in the psychedelic community. Kind of these ideas about reciprocity, and reciprocity becoming somewhat of a buzzword in the space. I think reciprocity as an indigenous concept has been expressed in different ways across different cultures, but where I first encountered the term was linking it to the Quechua term Aini, and this this term is often invoked along with ideas of balance and harmony. And I first really began a deeper investigation of it, reading the work of Catherine Allen, who's an anthropologist that wrote an ethnography of an Andean community in Sanco called The Hold Life Has. And it's one of the first ethnographies that I read as an anthropology student. And when you dig deeper into the Quechua term, it reveals a world that is in a perpetual state of dynamic imbalance. So this is a world where every living moment has an inherent disequilibrium that requires constant vigilance and continual reordering. So it's not really a case of give and take. It's not quite as simple as that. It's really a constant rebalancing effort that's in service of societal well-being. And so that is something that's informed by the idea that society really consists of more than just human beings, but also non-human persons, animals, the forest itself, and the trees within it, and other plants and beings, rivers, the mountains. And maybe if you may have experienced this sort of interconnectedness under the influence of psychedelics, but making that into something that you're embodying in your actual life kind of requires a recognition that life is only possible in relationship with other beings, in relationship with a diverse society of beings. And reciprocity is an orientation that prioritizes those relationships over your individual human agency. And I think that this reminder that reciprocity and well-being don't entail a mystical state of perfect harmony, but they actually entail an ongoing process, which is relational and includes all of the relationships in your life. I think reciprocity is something that can only happen within systems of relationships, and that requires you to recognize what those relationships are. So, employers and their relationship with their employees, the global North and the relationship with the global South, the individual and the community, humanity itself, and the biosphere that supports it. So that is what the Quechua term Aini is getting at, I believe, but I think that's something that has to be understood in the context of your own individual life and the relationships that you are participating in. And so I think it's really important to keep this in mind, especially when we're working within this same global system that is responsible for the injustices of colonialism, of extractivist practices, including cultural and ecological and biological piracy. So I believe at its core, the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative is something that recognizes the psychedelic industry profits from indigenous knowledge, and also goes further by recognizing that indigenous knowledge is made up of more than just the token individuals or groups or projects associated with psychedelic plants, with the psychedelic industry. And to be committed to reciprocity is something that requires an ongoing and consistent commitment to righting that imbalance. So recognizing that imbalance exists and then striving for that every day, because it's not something that can be solved with just one donation or one activity. And it's something that, like I said, it only takes place within a system of relationship. And that's part of the sort of guiding principle that informs the way IRRI is structured and the terms that IRRI operates under. And maybe, Bia, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the criteria for accepting donations for the IRRI program.
I have that question for myself, but first I wanted to follow a bit the script here on going a little bit back. So I'm playing the role of moderator, and I'm also a speaker, so I'm interviewing myself forever where it's worth this multiple hats that we all carry. Wanted to talk, Bia, can you talk a little bit about dilemmas of philanthropy and issues of indigenous representation? And here I want to ask permission not to speak as an academic. I have been an academic my whole life, and kind of migrated to the world of nonprofits and feel this exhaustion with academia and wanted to have a call to do something more hands-on and more directly affecting people's lives. And I'm going to share some ideas here that are not a profound academic reflection, but it's my lived experience, my blood, sweat, and tears. As a recent immigrant to the United States, I moved here 4 years ago, and at this later age, I am 50. So when I was 46, meaning that it's hard to teach an old monkey new tricks, as they say, learn a lot of things that are unfamiliar for me as a foreigner to this country, and have been trying to fundraise for Chacruna to make this project a dream, to be able to fund ourselves, to pay people's salaries because everybody has bills. And I have had multiple experiences with fundraising and meeting donors and philanthropists. And it has been very challenging for me. And I have frequently kind of lost my cool. And for that, I have been reprehended by my board. And on that, I'm still working on controlling my fires. But this is very much a response to how I feel in the presence of philanthropists, because you go there and you show your projects, you show what to do, and they ask you to do a deck, and then they say, well, your deck is not good enough, and then they ask you to make another meeting, and then they say, but what is the impact and what is the value? I can't see the value in this. I don't see why this is important when everybody else thinks it's important, and if they just go around 10 minutes, they'll figure out that it's important. So I feel strongly that there is this big, like, hierarchical and power imbalance in philanthropic relationships, and that it's like here in the United States, I feel like the indigenous that is trying to get the money from the philanthropists and wanted to create something different, that people that are doing work on the ground, they don't have to prove their value, and they don't have to justify and create decks and create marketing sexy narratives and talk by jargon and create formulaic statements that sell well, that look well, that are sexy, flashy, good marketing, yada yada. But actually, they are people doing things that matter on the ground for real. And so this is what I feel about philanthropy these days. Philanthropists should ask people, how can I help? How can I serve? What do you need? What is it that you need? How can I be of more support for you to fulfill better your mission? And how can I bring things to you that you don't have? And how can I collaborate? But putting the agency on the end that is weaker and poorer and with less resources as this kind of compensation of imbalance. And so this brings me to the issue of representation and of indigenous peoples in conferences. So the main idea behind the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, as Joe said, as Daniela said, is that we want to support collective organizations that are not led just by one person, but that are a group effort, that have some solid history, that have some important work for the community, by the community, led by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, or sometimes with a few presence of outsiders, but mainly geared towards supporting Indigenous people. That is the criteria. And as such, we have become also philanthropists to some groups, although our funds are modest compared to big nonprofits. We have just dispersed the first round of donations that we managed to get after asking all our friends in the psychedelic movement and some psychedelic businesses. We got $60,000. We have shared $2,700 for each of the 20 grantees or beneficiaries of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative. That changes a bit the relationship we have with Indigenous people, as if we become philanthropists to them, there is also this kind of power imbalance, whether we want it or not, whether we're not so wealthy or not. And we have been thinking very proactively, also with discussions among the team. And Daniela has been very influential for helping us to pay attention that when you are in these hierarchical positions and you ask things and favors from indigenous people, they might feel they don't have a choice to say no because they want to please you, because they can get benefits. So the importance of this meta reflection on what to do and what to ask from indigenous people is really important. And this brings again to this topic of having indigenous representation on psychedelic conferences. And although this is important, and in general, Chacrunas conferences have brought a lot of indigenous people to our own platforms, this is something we also need to be mindful, because again, the main question is not what is important for me and not what is my existential pursuit or my needs to look good or sell tickets or needs to tokenize my lineup to not be criticized, but what is good for indigenous peoples on their own terms. And so maybe some indigenous people are not, and forgive me if I say some words wrong in English because I'm not a native speaker, so please have mercy if I use in terms that are not ideal. I hope you understand what I mean. But some indigenous people might not be interested in participating or joining certain scientific research or things like that. And I think there is a current fever in the United States that sometimes I feel this pressure that everybody wants us to find an indigenous speaker for their for participating in their thing. And I'm almost wanting to put a sign saying I'm not a casting production company. And I feel there is, people in the psychedelic field also need to be extremely careful and reflective about all of these issues. Again, you don't have to be a genius. It's just a basic exercise that either as an anthropologist or a psychologist, the question to ask is, how does that feel on the other end for the other person on their terms? Is this something that might be appealing to them or not? So you can just do that basic check to see if that's important. Maybe what you think is nice, for example, if you're sitting on this groovy Bay Area, wealthy psychedelic startup and you want to have a council of elders and you want to find an indigenous person on the Amazon to sit in that council, is that important for that person? Is that something that she wants to do? Is that something that matters to her? And so the invitation here, especially for the plant medicine community, is to really do more homework and study more and start by perhaps studying other languages. If you want to communicate to local people, it's important that you can speak their language. I also might be biased, but I really think a lot of anthropological writing comes into place for people to study. And echoing what Joe said as well, the importance of having relationships. And so creating concrete relationships, not with an imaginary indigenous person, with a famous, icon, or with this abstract idea of this wise indigenous person that holds knowledge since the beginning of time and is an ecological wise shaman and that has all this wisdom, but create concrete relationships to concrete people and friendships, as we also were talking about, personal relationships, reciprocity on the more day-to-day basis. Anyway, I went a little bit off the question only, but I'll bring Daniela back. And I have two questions for you. What are your impressions as an ethnologist about what is needed for reciprocity to take place between indigenous and local peoples and psychedelic organizations? And also, if you can just share a little bit your impressions as an anthropologist about the current field of psychedelics.
Ooh, okay. Well, I hope I can try to put those together. Get away with not really answering the second one, perhaps. So I want to kind of pick up on what you were talking about in terms of, what's needed for reciprocity between indigenous and local peoples and psychedelic organizations, because I think what you were just saying actually embraces the kinds of, how I'm thinking about this. So first of all, reciprocity is relationship building. It's something that is not transactional. It's not immediate. And I think a lot of organizations are saying, look, we're going to do this for you. You do this for us. We'll give you the money if you do this with it. And people are kind of having to work around projects when actually they're already doing good work. I mean, the ED program has actually, the criteria has been to find groups that are actually working with or without our money. They're actually addressing the kinds of things that are important in those regions. So if you take those people and you say, here, you hold up a carrot and you say, okay, but we want you to do this, so we can call it our project and we can own it. And, this is what you've done, let's say for Chacuna, that is a transactional interaction, right? And so we'd like to build reciprocity into the reciprocity program itself through the way that we actually are treating the organizations that meet the criteria. So a real precondition for reciprocity is respect and trust, and trust doesn't happen automatically. You have to trust the people that you're working with. You trust them by not holding a carrot, by saying you've done great work and we'd like to support that. That's trust. Listening and not telling, right? Listening, which is what do you want to do with this? What would you like to do? Or if you come to a conference, what is it that you want to speak about? And not telling them, look, we've got you slotted in. We need you for this. We're sending you an app there, la-di-da, right? There's also another precondition is not, not to be idealistic, which is, in its worst form is actually a form of racism, because it makes people superhuman the same way you can turn it around and make people subhuman. And when you make people superhuman, it's a position that they can only, fall from. So, that is also part of reciprocity, is to treat people like people. So you don't treat shamans like they're gods. And I think that the community is actually coming to terms with that and because of lots of different things that have happened. The other thing is not to be ethnocentric, and that's like a word that we're all familiar with. It means really not seeing the world, only through your perspective and your eyes and point of view. But if you want to take it to another level, it actually means that not everything should be integrated into the way that you see the world. So it's not about what can you do for us, or how do we take what you're doing and platform it, or how do we take what you're doing to say we're doing good and look at us, but rather, as Bea was saying before, what do we have? Is there something we can facilitate? Is there something that you need? That's a really important part of reciprocity. So I would say that doing, our part in bringing greater balance and leveling the playing field, and the kinds of work that's funded, is important. Not just projects that mirror what the West needs, wants, and recognizes as important, because there's lots of things that people recognize as critical that is not as glamorous. I mean, so for instance, where I work, the kids who want to study high school, they have to go and they have to stay in town and they don't have the money for it. And there's nothing glamorous about trying to raise funds for that aspect of life, for instance. But there are small groups. There is a small fund to support that every now and then I rustle up and go around and try to collect, and it's never enough. It doesn't come close. It's shamefully low. But if I were to instead market that as, they're like sitting around with their grandfather, preparing for a ceremony, and they are doing all these other things, it would be very different. It would be easier, because the West would recognize that as being significant. But the thing is, going to secondary school and participating in sacred ceremonies, they're not two different things. Overall well-being in communities encompasses all activities. All these things need to work together. And that's one of the things that this program recognizes. So it's not just about picking one aspect of quotidian life and fetishizing it and saying this is the most important thing in the system. It's about recognizing, what makes the system healthy and all of its parts, and many of those parts are not glamorous. So, I would say then that the psychedelic community just benefits from broadening the vision even beyond the human, non-human world, because I think that the West very much recognizes that, or likes to, and it's very appealing. I think it's the non-glamorous human aspects of the world that need more attention, and really just opening our eyes to the daily grind and the hard work that has to happen, for places to thrive. And I would say that Unity is actually doing something very radical, because it's saying, we're not having people send us a proposal and telling us what they're doing with the funds. We're actually saying, what do you think is important to do with this? And that is trust. People will report on how that is spent. And these aren't just random people. These are actual grassroots groups that have done incredible work. But giving them the respect and the trust to say, we know that you're going to use this well. Please do tell us about it, at the end of the year. But that is what relationship building is. And that breaks the mirror that we're always putting in front of ourselves. And it broadens the context in which plants are consumed and into their much greater interrelated environments.
Beautiful. So nice to have this opportunity so we can remember that this is actually a super cool project. And despite the challenges, we feel, like if you're a warrior, like a soldier taking a break under the shadow, and then you want to put your arms on and you put your vest back on and go to the battle. And it's so hard to do things in social sciences and anthropology. It's so marginalized to talk about indigenous people, and it's cruel. The lack of money, the lack of the wealth that exists, the millions of dollars that are being poured into the psychedelic movement, and the challenge, of indigenous people today still being around. I want to take the chance to ask our audience some questions before we go there. Just wanted to see if you want to speak anything else. Joe, you have been going to very expensive conferences. You were just in this one called Miami Wonderland. I don't know exactly what is the reason of that name, but it was all by psychedelic businesses. And you have been seeing a lot what's going around. You have been giving a lot of lectures and a lot of podcasts, and you're being really, really requested to talk about this project. Do you want to share how does it feel after more or less 8 months or so when we launched it in April? And how do you feel the community is receiving, and how are you feeling about everything?
Well, I think one of the words that has come up for me since we launched this is contradiction, because it's the field itself is full of contradictions, especially contexts like the conference that I was recently at, but also just working in the philanthropy space and asking people to support this project, which to me, the value of it is self-evident, and there shouldn't really need to be a marketing team to promote this to business owners and wealthy and successful people. And I see this going on in the psychedelic space. Just it seems like the reciprocity is often an afterthought. They already have their business plan. They already have their agreement with their shareholders and their plans to return investments to them. And then they realized that their brand is missing something important, which is the reciprocity, because the community is going to notice that, and it's not something that's being built in from the beginning. And so that's something that I really hope that Erie is able to encourage. This model is something that others can learn from, can improve on. And I think part of the contradiction to me just it involves this idea that we can use the ideas that come from a colonial mindset of intellectual property, of a certain type of access and benefit sharing that's based on ownership of certain knowledge, of certain compounds, of certain plants. And then if you can establish which group owns this, they can receive a share of the profits. And you have to delineate who and who is not the indigenous owner of whatever plant or medicine you're speaking about. And that will inevitably exclude indigenous communities that have been cut off from their ancestral lineage, who have been displaced for whatever reason, are not able to prove to Western standards that they are owed something. And I think a lot of people in the psychedelic space, a lot of industries are trying to sort of get out of this reciprocity by saying, well, we're using second generation psychedelics, or we're using synthetic compounds, so there's no need for reciprocity with indigenous communities. But I think that misses the point, really, that reciprocity is something that all of us need to engage with, because the fact is, life itself is a gift, that and all industry and all communities are living from things that are ultimately extracted from the natural world. We are all being supported by others, and so there's no, the idea is that Erie offers one pathway for reciprocity that helps to alleviate ecological degradation, and also helps to rebalance this historical imbalance, and also this current contemporary imbalance that seems to be just getting exacerbated by the psychedelic renaissance rather than healed or ameliorated. So I think I hope that Erie is also able to shed light on that relationship that exists for each person and each company, each entrepreneur, no matter what they're doing, they're living from something that's being extracted from the natural world, or from other communities, or from people doing the labor, the natural resources that go into it, whether it's synthetic or not. And so that's, to me, part of the value.
Just want to make sure that we have asked some questions from the audience. Maybe, I don't know, any of you want to take this. Is there a tension between the spiritual practice side of psychedelic use and the commercial side as use becomes more widespread?
Well, I think that there's always going to be tension when any spiritual practice is commercialized, whether it's psychedelic or not. That goes for like mega churches, or even any therapeutic modalities that involved spirituality. But I think maybe Daniela has some more insight on that, since she's written about the globalization.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, I'm looking for the question in the chat and I don't see it. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, I'll post it here too. Is there a tension between the spiritual practice side of psychedelic use and the commercial side as use becomes more widespread?
Yeah, well, there's even more than a tension, there's almost a denial that there has been some form of exchange around these things, historically. So because everyone is pretending that something's spiritual, I think that makes the that plays into it in funny ways, because it becomes almost like something that people don't talk about, and it becomes more secretive. I mean, people will, find real shamans and a real local place, and nobody wanted money, and so on and so forth. But again, reciprocity. There's different systems of exchange and relationships where you care for people, where there's other kinds of resources in which, people are compensated. So, so there's that sort of tension, denial there. And in terms of the commercial aspect, it's really that entrepreneurial process that I talked about. That's always been outsiders, and it could be nationals, but it's usually non-local, non-indigenous that sort of take that space. They often well-intentioned, they come in, this is great, this is wonderful, let me start a little business around it, let other people experience this wonderful thing. But in the end, it's something, proprietary sort of practices being taken from the people that have a sort of common use of them.
Yeah, I want to quote somebody that I really like to read. Daniela Peluso. So she spoke about this, our styles are different. It's like this, people. You go drink ayahuasca. Oh my God, it's wonderful. Oh, wow. Ayahuasca tells you everything. And I'm going to give up that dirty job, and I'm just going to support nature and I want to move to the Amazon, and boom, you go there and you move to the Amazon and you actually do that. But hey, you're not going to be so original in inventing this super new economy that everything is, horizontal, and you're dealing with totally different standards. You bring that baggage of commercial capitalism, aggressive techniques, and you create these little businesses that, although your calling was to do something so different and so special, you kind of end up frequently doing the same that is around. So your psychedelic experience didn't inspire a new psychedelic business model, but rather just a business model. And with that, a lot of paradoxes. And frequently indigenous people end up being like the maids or the chauffeurs or, the cooks of the gringos that have the money. And then, they are figured in the site. Every gringo has their bio with a lot of details of their accomplishments. And then the shaman is one line, shaman. You don't even know where he comes from or where he is originated. And so for that, we also published this document that it's called Commodification of Ayahuasca. How can we do better? And I want to recommend folks this document published in Chacruna. And bring the last question. What is the potential for bringing interspecies collaboration in the practice of reciprocity? It's a good one, a hard one.
Well, I have a little bit of an opinion on that. I think that part of that to me involves, like we mentioned at the beginning, recognizing the cultural conditioning that goes into our perspectives. So this includes the sort of what is ostensibly a secular and objective point of view that informs the approaches to conservation that people take, the approaches to biological conservation, as well as land management, that is based on the idea that the forest is not a network of intelligent beings, but is just a forest, and that it's just a source of resources and functions to perform certain ecosystem services like storage of carbon. But the perspective that informs this is really more of a cultural one rather than a scientific one. And that there's more and more evidence and data supporting the idea that the forest is actually full of intelligent communication between a variety of different beings, and that the forest actually functions this way as this network, and that this is a perspective that many indigenous ontologies and cosmologies also incorporate, and that affects the way that they manage their land, and maybe is possibly part of the explanation for why indigenous territories have less deforestation, have more biodiversity than national parks or forest preserves or nature reserves. And so I think ecologists and environmentalists and conservationists can learn from this and try to apply a perspective that involves recognizing other agencies, other beings, forests and trees and other organisms as having agency and intelligence, and the forest as being an intelligent network of different selves with agency, and not only human beings being the exceptional organisms that have those characteristics, and that will inform more effective conservation efforts.
Thank you, Joe. I also want to quote had a recent speaker talking. We are doing the series in Chacruna called Patenting the Sacred, which is a kind of educational branch of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative. And it's trying to tackle the topic of patents and intellectual property from different angles, including indigenous, commercial, legal, and anthropological. We had a recent speaker, and he commented on, we're talking about who knows, like, knowledge, the source of knowledge. And he was remarking what is the difference between, for example, like finding out the existence of the combination of ayahuasca, no? How did you manage to find those two plants and combine them? And once that is done, like to try to synthesize the active principle, it's a kind of different knowledge. After people found that out, you synthesize that, among millions and millions of species that existed naturally. And so I think what is talking is that there is knowledge in this communication. If you ask indigenous people and if you take them seriously, they're saying the plants taught them. So a lot of that knowledge comes from communicating with plants and seeing that plants, in fact, are humans like us that have agency and intentionality. I want to see if you all have any final words so we can wrap it up. Daniela, thank you for participating in this event. I know how busy you are. Did you want to share anything else with our audience?
No, just very nice to be here, and I, again, just that reciprocity is part of everything that's important and that matters, and that this set of programs is a great way to do that, especially if you don't have the time and energy to address those things in other aspects of your relationship with psychedelics.
Joe Mace, the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative Program Director, what is your final words?
Well, I want to thank Daniela as well, and thank you, Bia, for being here with me. And I think that the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative and just this reflection, investigation of reciprocity is something that can be recognized by each of us in our own lives, and I think many people within the psychedelic community care about this. There's just a question of how to move forward now that you've recognized that you exist within this system of relationship. How do you honor those relationships, and what's the most impactful way to use your resources to support indigenous communities? And so that's a question that IRRI is trying to answer and provide at least one answer for. And I'm just really encouraged and inspired by the messages and communications that I have with the indigenous communities that we're partnered with, and the sort of work that we're able to support. And I encourage everyone to follow our Thursday series, Indigenous Reciprocity Thursdays, where we do some audiovisual publications, providing little updates and that we support. And just thank you, everyone, for listening.
I also want to thank everybody and invite you all to join our membership system and be a part of our movement. I am a recent immigrant to the United States. I'm going to end with something a bit tacky. About even if I am struggling with the United States, this is still a land of a lot of hopes and opportunities and dreams and civil rights and place where things, cool shit happens that is exported all over the world. So for me, when I look my Visa card and it's saying Chacruna Institute, I feel happy. You know, it's a dream, it's a vision, it's happening. We're doing it. It's extremely difficult. I suffer a lot all the time with the bureaucracies and the rules and everything else. But it's, you know, you have a cool dream, you have a nice idea. There's a lot of people like us out there. You can join us, you can be part of this movement. Maybe we're not going to change everything, but we change a little bit. And meanwhile, we have a lot of fun and we have a lot of compassion, because social justice without love, without compassion, without, you know, some ability to laugh of ourselves is not going anywhere. So that's the proposal that we bring from Chacruna with our Brazilian love, our Latin love, a lot of Mexicans, and just hired a guy from Argentina. I'm super excited to do this bridge. No walls, but bridges between North and South. And follow us on social media. Much love to everybody. Thank you, Bioneers.
Yay.
Thank you.